Chapter 35. 30 seconds can be very long sometimes. Long enough to work a miracle or a revolution. In 30 seconds, life changed wholly for Barney and Valancy Snipe. They had gone around the lake one June evening in their disappearing propeller, fished for an hour in a little creek, and left their boat there and walked through the woods to Port Lawrence 2 miles away. Valancy prowled a bit in the shops and got herself a new pair of sensible shoes. Her old pair had suddenly and completely given out, and this evening she had been compelled to put on her little fancy pair of patent leathers with rather high, slender heels, which she had bought in a fit of folly one day in the winter because they were beautiful and because she wanted to make one foolish, extravagant purchase in her life. And she sometimes put them on in the evening in Blue Castle, but this was the first time she had worn them outside. She had not found them too easy to walking up through the hills in them, and Barney guyed her unmercifully about them. But in spite of the inconvenience, Valancy secretly rather liked the look of her trim ankles and high instep above those pretty foolish shoes, and did not change them in the shop as she might have done. The sun was hanging low above the pines when they left Port Lawrence. To the north of it the woods closed round the town quite suddenly. Valancy had always had some sense of stepping from one world to another, from reality to fairyland, when she went out of Port Lawrence, and twinkling found it shut off behind her in the armies of pines. A mile and a half from Port Lawrence there was a small railroad station with a little station house, which this hour of the day was deserted, since no local train was due. Not a soul was in sight when Barney and Valancy emerged from the woods. Off to the left, the sudden curve in the track hid it from view, but over the tops beyond, a long plume of smoke betokened the approach of a through train. The rails were vibrating to its thunder as Barney stepped across the switch. Valancy was a few steps behind him, loitering to gather June bells along the little winding path. But there was plenty of time to get across before the train came. She stepped uncertainly over the first railing. She would never tell how it happened, and the ensuing 30 seconds always seemed in her recollection like a chaotic nightmare which she had endured the agony of 1,000 lifetimes. The heel of her pretty foolish shoe caught in the crevice of the switch. She could not pull it loose. "Barney! Barney!" she called out in alarm. Barney turned, saw her predicament, saw her ashen face, and dashed back. He tried to pull her clear. He tried to wrench her foot from the prisoning hold. In vain. In a moment the train would sweep around the corner, would be on them. "Go! Go quick! You'll be killed, Barney!" shrieked Valancy, trying to push him away. Barney dropped to his knees, ghost white, frantically tearing at her shoelace. The knot defied his trembling fingers. He snatched a knife from his pocket and dashed at it. Valancy still strove blindly to push him away. Her mind was full of the hideous thought that Barney was going to be killed. She had not thought for her own danger. "Barney! Go! Go! For God's sake, go!" "Never!" muttered Barney between his set teeth. He gave one mad wrench at the lace. As the train thundered around the curve, he sprang and caught Valancy, dragging her clear, leaving her shoe behind. The wind from the train, as it swept by, turned to an icy cold the streamy perspiration on his face. "Thank God!" he breathed. For a moment they stood stupidly staring at each other, two white, shaken, wild-eyed creatures. Then they stumbled over a little to the seat at the end of the station house and dropped on it. Barney buried his face in his hand and said not a word. Valancy sat, staring straight ahead of her with unseeing eyes at the great pine woods, at the stumps of the clearing, and the long gleaming rails. There was only one thought in her dazed mind, a thought that seemed to burn as the shaving of fire might burn her body. Dr. Trent told her over a year ago that she had a serious form of heart disease, that any excitement might be fatal. But if that were so, why was she not dead now, this very minute? She had just experienced as much and as terrible excitement as most people endure in a lifetime, crowded into endless 30 seconds, and yet she had not died of it. She was not an iota worse for it. A little wobbly at the knees, as anyone might have been, a quicker heartbeat, as anyone might have, nothing more. Why? Was it possible Dr. Trent had made a mistake? Valancy shivered as if a cold wind had suddenly chilled her to her soul. She looked at Barney, hunched beside her, silent, was very eloquent. Had the same thought occurred to him? Did he suddenly find himself confronted by the appalling suspicion that he was married, not for a few months or for a year, but for good, and all to a woman he did not love, and who had foisted herself upon him by some trick or lie? Valancy turned sick before the horror of it. It could not be. It was too cruel, too devilish. Dr. Trent couldn't have made a mistake. Impossible. He was one of the best heart specialists in Ontario. She was foolish, unnerved by a recent horror. She remembered some of the hideous spasms of pain she had had. There must be something seriously the matter with her heart to account for them. But she had not had any for nearly 3 months. Why? Presently Barney bestirred himself. He stood, without looking at Valancy, and said casually, "I suppose we'd better be hiking back. Sun's getting low. Are you good for the rest of the road?" "I think so," said Valancy miserably. Barney went across the clearing and picked up the parcel he had dropped, the parcel containing her new shoes. He brought them to her, and let her take out the shoes and put them on without any assistance, and while he stood with his back towards her and looked out over the pines, they walked in silence down the shadowy trail to the lake. In the silence, Barney steered the boat into the sunset miracle that was the Mistowis. In silence, they went around the feathery heatherlands and across the coral bays and silver rivers where the canoes were slipping by up and down in the afterglow. In silence, they went past cottages echoing with music and laughter. In silence, they drew up at the landing place below Blue Castle. Valancy went up the rock steps and into the house. She dropped miserably on the first chair she came to and sat there, staring through the oriel, oblivious to Good Luck's frantic purrs of joys and Banjo's savage glares of protest at her occupying his chair. Barney came in a few minutes later. He did not come near her, but he stood behind her and asked gently if she felt any the worse for her experience. Valancy would have given her years of happiness to be able to answer honestly yes. "No," she said flatly. Barney went into Bluebeard's chamber and shut the door. She heard him pacing up and down, up and down. He never paced like that before. An hour ago, only an hour ago, she had been so happy. Chapter 36. Valancy finally went to bed. Before she went to bed, she read Dr. Trent's letter. It comforted her a little. So positive, so assured, the writing so black and steady. Not the writing of a man who didn't know what he was writing about. But she could not sleep. She pretended to be asleep when Barney came in. Barney pretended to go to sleep. But Valancy knew perfectly well he wasn't sleeping any more than she was. And she knew he was lying there, staring through the darkness. Thinking of what? Trying to face what? Valancy, who had spent so many happy wakeful hours a night lying by that window, now paid the price of them all in this one night of misery. A horrible, portentous fact was slowly looming out before her, the nebula of surmise and fear. She could not shut her eyes to it, push it away, ignore it. There could be nothing seriously wrong with her heart, no matter what Dr. Trent had said. If there had been, those 30 seconds would have killed her. There was no use to recall Dr. Trent's letter and reputation. The greatest specialists made mistakes sometimes. Dr. Trent had made one. Towards morning, Valancy fell into a fitful doze with ridiculous dreams. One of them was of Barney taunting her with having tricked him. In her dream, she lost her temper and struck him violently on the head with her rolling pin. He proved to be made of glass and shivered into splinters all over the floor. She woke with a cry of horror, a gasp of relief, a short laugh over the absurdity of her dream, and a miserable, sickening recollection of what had happened. Barney was gone. Valancy knew, as some people knew these things, inescapably, without being told. He was not in the house, or in Bluebeard's chamber either. There was a curious silence in the living room, a silence with something uncanny about it. The old clock had stopped. Barney must have forgotten to wind it up, something he'd never done before. The room without it was dead, though the sunshine streamed through the oriel, and dimples of light from the dancing waves beyond quivered over the walls. The canoe was gone, but Lady Jane was under the mainland trees, so Barney had not betaken himself to the wilds. He would not return until night, perhaps not even then. He must be angry with her. That furious silence of his must mean anger. Cold, deep, justifiable resentment. Well, Valancy knew what she must do. She was not suffering very keenly now, yet the curious numbness that pervaded her was way worse than pain. It was as if something in her had died. She forced herself to cook and eat a little breakfast. Mechanically she put the Blue Castle in perfect order. Then she put on her hat and coat, locked the door, hid the key in the hollow of the old pine, and crossed to the mainland in the motor boat. She was going to Deerwood to see Dr. Trent. She must know. Chapter 37. Dr. Trent looked at her blankly and fumbled among his recollections. Miss... Mrs. Snipe, said Valancy quietly. I was Miss Valancy Sterling when I came to you last May, over a year ago. I wanted to consult you about my heart. Dr. Trent's face cleared. Oh, of course, I remember now. I'm not really to blame for not knowing. You've changed splendidly, and married. Well, it is agreed with you. You don't look like an invalid now, hey? I remember that day. I was badly upset. Hearing about poor Ned bowled me over. But Ned is good as new, and you too, evidently. I told you so, you know. Told you there was nothing to worry over. Valancy looked at him. You told me. In your letter, she said slowly, with a curious feeling that someone else was talking through her lips, that I had angina pectoris, in the very last stages, complicated with an aneurysm, that I might die at any minute, that I couldn't live longer than a year? Dr. Trent stared at her. Impossible, he said blankly. I wouldn't have told you that. Valancy took his letter from her bag and handed it to him. Mrs. Valancy Sterling, he read. Yes, yes, of course, I wrote to you on the train that night, but I told you there was nothing serious. Read your letter, insisted Valancy. Dr. Trent took it out, unfolded it, glanced over it, and dismayed look came into his face. He jumped over his feet and strolled agitated about the room. Good heavens! This was the letter I meant for poor Miss Jane Sterling, from Port Lawrence. She was here that day, too. I sent you the wrong letter. What an unpardonable gracelessness! But I believed myself that night. My God! And you believed me. You believed you didn't, and you went to another doctor? Valancy stood up, turned around, looked foolishly about her, and sat down. I believed it, she said. I didn't go any other doctor. It would take too long to explain, but I believed I was going to die soon. Dr. Trent halted before her. I could never forgive myself. What a year you must have had! But you don't look. I don't understand. Never mind, said Valancy dully. And so there's nothing matter with my heart. Well, nothing serious. You had what's called pseudo-angina. It's never fatal. It passes away with proper treatment, or sometimes with a shock of joy. Have you been much troubled with it? Not at all since March, answered Valancy. She remembered the marvelous feeling of recreation she had when she saw Barney coming home after the storm. Had that shock of joy cured her? Then likely you're all right. I told you what to do in the letter you should have got, and of course I suppose you'd go to another doctor. Child, why didn't you? I didn't want anyone to know. Idiot, said Dr. Trent bluntly. I don't understand such folly. And poor Miss Sterling, she must have gotten your letter, telling her there's nothing serious the matter. Well, it couldn't have made any difference. Her case was hopeless. Nothing she could have done or left undone could have made any difference. I was surprised she lived as long as she did, 2 months. And she was here that day, not long before you. I hated to tell her the truth. You think I'm a bit of an old curmudgeon, and my letters are blunt enough. I can't soften things. But a sniveling coward when it comes to telling a woman face to face that she's going to die soon. I told her how to look up some features of the case I wasn't sure of, and let her know the next day. But you got her letter. Look here. Dear Miss Sterling. Yes, I noticed that, but I thought it was a mistake. I didn't know there were any Sterlings in Port Lawrence. She was the only one, a lonely girl, lived by herself, only a little home girl. She died 2 months after she was here, died in her sleep. My mistake couldn't have made any difference to her, but you! I can't forgive myself for inflicting a year's misery on you. It's time I retire, all right, when I do things like that. Even my son is supposed to be fatally injured. Can you ever forgive me? A year of misery! Valancy smiled a tortured smile as she thought of the happiness Dr. Trent's mistake had brought her. But she was paying for it now. Oh, she was paying. If to feel was to live, she was living with vengeance. She let Dr. Trent examine her and answer all his questions. And when he told her she was fit as a fiddle and probably would live to be 100, she got up and went away silently. She knew there were a great many horrible things outside waiting to be thought over. Dr. Trent thought she was odd. Anybody would have thought, given from her hopeless eyes and woebegone face, that he had given her a sentence of death instead of life. Snaith? Snaith! Who the devil had she married? He never heard of the Snaiths in Deerwood, and she had been such a sallow, faded little old maid. Gad, but marriage made such a difference in her, somehow, whoever Snaith was. Snaith, Dr. Trent remembered. That old scallion up back. Had Valancy married him? And her clan had let her. Well, that probably solved the mystery. She had married in haste and repented in leisure, and that's why she wasn't overjoyed at learning she was a good insurance prospect after all. Married! To God know whom. Or what? Jailbird? Defrauder? Fugitive from justice? Must be pretty bad if she looked to death as released, poor girl. But why were women such fools? Dr. Trent dismissed Valancy from his mind, though to the day of his death he was ashamed of putting those letters in the wrong envelopes. 38. Valancy walked through the back streets through Lover's Lane. She did not want to meet anyone she knew. She did not want to meet even people she didn't know. She hated to be seen. Her mind was so confused, so torn, so messy. She felt that her appearance must be the same. She drew a sobbing breath of relief as she left the road behind and found herself on the back-up road. There was little fear of meeting anyone she knew here. The cars that fled by her with rancorous shrieks were filled with strangers. One of them was packed with young people, whirling past her, singing uproariously, "My wife has the fever, oh then! My wife has the fever, oh then! My wife has the fever, oh, I hope I won't leave her, for I want to be single again." Valancy flinched as if one of them had leaned from the car and cut her across the face with a whip. She made a covenant with death, and death had cheated her. Now life stood mocking her. She had trapped Barney, trapped him into marrying him, and divorce was so hard to get in Ontario, so expensive, and Barney was poor. With life, fear had come back into her heart. Sickening fear. Fear what Barney would think, would say, fear of the future that must be lived without him, fear of her insulted, reputed clan. She had one draught from a divine cup, and now it was dashed from her lips. With no kind, friendly death to rescue her, she must go on living and longing for it. Everything was spoiled, smirched, defaced. Even that year in the Blue Castle, even her unashamed love for Barney. It had been beautiful because death waited. And now it was only sordid because death was gone. How could anyone bear an unbearable thing? She must go back and tell him. Must make him believe she had not meant to trick him. She must make him believe that. She must say goodbye to her Blue Castle and return to the brick house on Elm Street, back to everything she had thought left behind forever. The old bondage, the old fears. But that did not matter. All that mattered now was that Barney must somehow be made to believe she had not consciously tricked him. When Valancy reached the pines by the lake, she brought out of her daze of pain by a startling sight. There, parked on the side of the old battered, ragged Lady Jane, was another car. A wonderful car! A purple car! Not a dark royal purple, but a blatant, screaming purple. It shone like a mirror, and its interior plainly indicated the car cast of Veuve de Verve. In the driver's seat sat a haughty chauffeur in a livery, and in the tonneau sat a man who opened the door and bounced up nimbly as Valancy came down the path leading to the landing place. He stood among the pines, waiting for her, and Valancy took in every detail of him. A stout, short, pudgy man, with a broad, rubicund, good-humored face, and a clean-shaven face, though it was unparalyzed little imp at the back of Valancy's paralyzed mind whistled the thought, such a face should have a friend of white whisker around it. Old-fashioned, steely-rimmed spectacles on prominent blue eyes. A pursy mouth, little round knobbly nose. Where, groped Valancy, had she seen that face before? It seemed as familiar to her as her own. The stranger wore a green hat and a light-fawn overcoat, over a suit of a loud checkered pattern. His tie was brilliant green of a lighter shade. On the plump hand he outstretched to intercept Valancy, an enormous diamond ring winked at her. But he had a pleasant, fatherly smile, and in his hearty, unmodulated voice was a ring of something that attracted her. "Can you tell me, miss, if that house yonder belongs to Mr. Redfern, and if so, how can I get to it?" "Redfern!" A vision of bottles seemed to dance before Valancy's eyes, long bottles of bitters, round bottles of hair tonic, square bottles of liniment, short, corpulent little bottles of purple pills, and all of them bearing the very prosperous, beaming moon face and steel-rimmed spectacles on the label. "Dr. Redfern!" "No," said Valancy faintly. "No, that house belongs to Mr. Snaith." Dr. Redfern nodded. "Yes, I understand that Barney's been calling himself Snaith. Well, it's his middle name. That was his mother's. Barney Snaith Redfern, that's him. And now, miss, can you tell me how to get over to that island? Nobody seems to be home there. I've done some waving and yelling. Henry there wouldn't yell. He's a one-man job. But old Dr. Redfern can yell with the best of 'em yet, and I ain't above doing it. Raised nothing but a couple of crows. Guess Bernie's out for the day." "He was away when I left this morning," said Valancy. "I suppose he hasn't come home yet?" She spoke flat and tonelessly. This last shock had temporarily relieved her of what little power of reasoning she had been left her by Dr. Trent's revelation. In the back of her mind, an aforementioned little imp was jeering repeatedly the silly old proverb, "It never rains but it pours." She tried not to think. What was the use? Dr. Redfern was gazing at her in perplexity. When you left this morning. Do you live over there?" He waved his diamond at the blue castle. "Of course," said Valancy stupidly. "I'm his wife." Dr. Redfern took out a yellow silk handkerchief, removed his hat, and mopped his brow. He was very bald, and Valancy's imp whispered, "Why be bald? Why lose your manly beauty? Try Redfern's hair vigor. It keeps you young." "Excuse me," said Dr. Redfern. "This is a bit of a shock." "Shock seems to be in the air this morning." The imp said this out loud before Valancy could prevent it. "I didn't know Barney was married. I didn't think he would have got married without telling his old dad." Were Dr. Redfern's eyes misty? Amid her own dull ache of misery, fear, and dread, Valancy felt a pang of pity for him. "Don't blame him," she said hurriedly. It wasn't his fault. It was all my doing." "You didn't ask him to marry you, I suppose," twinkled Dr. Redfern. "He might have let me know. I've gotten acquainted with my daughter-in-law before this, if he had. But I'm glad to meet you now, my dear, very glad. You look like a sensible young woman. I used to sort of fear Barney'd pick out some pretty little fluff just because she was good-looking. They were all after him, of course. Wanted his money, eh? Didn't like the pills and the bitters, but liked the dollars, eh? Wanted to dip those pretty fingers in old Doc's millions, eh?" "Millions?" said Valancy faintly. She wished she could have sit down somewhere. She wished she could have a chance to think. She wished she, and the Blue Castle, could sink to the bottom of the Mistawus and vanish from human sight forevermore. "Millions," said Dr. Redfern complacently. "And Bertie chucks them for that." Again he shook the diamond contemptuously at Blue Castle. "Wouldn't you think he'd have more sense? And all of account of a white bit of girl. He must have gotten over that feeling anyhow, since he's married. He must have persuaded him to come back to civilization. All nonsense wasting his life like that. Ain't you going to take me over to your house, my dear? I suppose you're getting some way of getting there." "Of course," said Valancy stupidly. She led the way down to the little grove where the disappearing propeller boat was snugged. "Does your man want to come too?" "Who? Henry? Not he. Look at him there disapproving. Disapproves of the whole exhibition. The trail up from the road nearly gave him conniption. Well, it was a devilish road to put a car on. Whose old bus is that up there?" "Barney's." "Good Lord! Does Barney Redfern ride in a thing like that? It looks like the great-great-grandmother of all the Fords." "It isn't a Ford. It's a Grey Sulson," said Valancy spiritedly. For some reason, Dr. Redfern's good-humored ridicule of old Lady Jane stung her to life, a life that was all pain, but still life, better than the horrible half-dead, half-aliveness of the past few minutes, or years. She waved Dr. Redfern curtly to the boat and took him over to the Blue Castle. The key was still in the old pine, the house still silent and deserted. Valancy took the doctor to the living room to the western veranda. She must at least be out there where there was air. It was still sunny, but in the southwest a great thundercloud, with white crests and gorges of purple shadow, was slowly rising over the Mistawus. The doctor dropped with a gasp in a rustic chair and mopped his brow again. "Warm, eh? Lord, what a view! Wonder could have softened Henry if he could see it." "Have you had dinner?" asked Valancy. "Yes, my dear. Had it before we left Port Lawrence. Didn't know what sort of wild hermit hollow we were coming to, you see. Hadn't any idea I was going to find a nice little daughter-in-law already up here to toss me a meal. Cats, eh? Puss, puss, see that? Cats love me. Bernie always fond of cats. That's the only thing he took from me. He's his poor mother's boy." Valancy had been idly thinking that Barney must resemble his mother. She had remained standing by the steps, but Dr. Redfern waved her to the swinging seat. "Sit down, dear. Never stand when you can sit. I want to take a good look at Barney's wife. Well, well, I like your face. No beauty. You don't mind me saying that. But you've got sense enough to know it, I reckon. Sit down." Valancy sat down. To be obliged to sit when mental agony urges us to stride up and down is the refinement of torture. Every nerve of her being was crying out to be alone, to be hidden. But she had to sit and listen to Dr. Redfern, who didn't mind talking at all. "When do you think Bernie will be back?" "I don't know. Not before night, probably." "Where did he go?" "I don't know that either. Likely to the woods up back." "So he doesn't always tell you his coming and goings either." Bernie's always a secretive young devil. Never understood him. Just like his poor mother. "But I thought a lot of him. It hurt me when he disappeared as he did. 11 years ago. Haven't seen my boy for 11 years. 11 years? Valancy was surprised. "It's only 6 since he came here." Oh, he was in the Klondike before that, and all over the world. He used to drop me a line now and then, never give any clue where he was, but a line to say he was right. Suppose he told you all that." "No, I know nothing of his past life," said Valancy with sudden eagerness. She wanted to know. She must know now. It hadn't mattered before. Now she must know it all. She could never hear it from Barney. She might never even see him again. But if she did, would she not be able to talk of his past? "What happened? Why did he leave his home? Tell me! Tell me!" "Well, it ain't much of a story. Just a young fool gone mad because of a quarrel with his girl. Only Barney was a stubborn fool, always stubborn. He never could make a boy do anything he didn't want to, from the day he was born. He was always a quiet, gentle little chap, too. Good as gold. His poor mother died when he was only 2 years old. I'd just begun to make money with my hair vigor. I dreamed of the formula, you see. Some dream that. The cash rolled in. Bernie had everything he wanted. I sent him to the best schools, private schools. I meant to make a gentleman of him. Never had a chance myself. Meant he should have every chance. He went through McGill. Got honors and all that. I wanted him to go in for law. He hankered after journalism and stuff like that. Wanted me to buy a paper for him, or back him with publishing what he called a real, worthwhile, honest-to-goodness Canadian magazine. I suppose I should have done it. Always did what he wanted me to do. Wasn't he all I had to live for? Wanted him to be happy, and he was never happy. Can you feel it? Not that he said so, but he always had a feeling he wasn't happy. Everything he wanted, all the money he could spend, his own bank account, travel, seeing the world, but he wasn't happy. Not until he fell in love with Ethel Travers, and then he was happy for a little while. The cloud had reached over the sun, and a great purple shadow came swiftly over Mistawis. It touched the blue castle, rolled over it. Valancy shivered. "Yes," she said with painful eagerness, though every word was cutting to her heart. "What was she like?" "Prettiest girl in Montreal," said Dr. Redfern. "Oh, she was a looker, right, eh? Gold hair, shiny as silk, great big soft black eyes, skin like milk and roses. Don't wonder Barney fell for her. Brains as well. She wasn't a bit of fluff. B.A. from McGill. A thoroughbred, too. One of the best families. But a bit of lean in the purse. Barney was mad about her. Happiest young fool you ever saw. Then, the bust-up." "What happened?" Valancy had taken off her hat, and was absently thrusting a pin in and out of it. Good Luck was purring beside her. Banjo was regarding Dr. Redfern with suspicion. Nip and Tuck were lazily calling in the pines. Mista was beckoning. Everything was the same. Nothing was the same. It was 100 years since yesterday. Yesterday, at this time, she and Barney had been eating a belated dinner here with laughter. Laughter? Valancy felt she had done with laughter forever, and with tears for that matter. She had no further use for either of them. "Blessed if I know, my dear. Some quarrel fool, I suppose. Barney's just lit out, disappeared. Wrote me from the Yukon. Said an engagement was broken and he wasn't coming back. And I ought to try to hunt him up because he was never coming back, and I didn't. What was the use? I knew Bernie. I went on piling of money because there wasn't anything else to do. But I was might lonely. All I could live for was them notes now and then from Bernie. Klondike, England, South Africa, China, everywhere. I thought maybe he'd come back some day to his lonesome old dad. Then 6 years ago even the letters stopped. I didn't hear a word of him or from him till last Christmas." "Did he write?" "No, but he drew a check for $15,000 from his bank account. The bank manager is a friend of mine, one of my biggest shareholders. He always promised me he'd let me know if Bernie drew any checks. Bernie had 50,000 there, and he never touched a cent of it till last Christmas. The check he made out to Annesley, Toronto." "Annesley's?" Valancy had heard of Annesley's. She had a box on a dressing table with an Annesley's trademark. "Yes, the big jewelry house over there. After I thought over it for a while, I got brisk. Wanted to locate Bernie. Had a special reason for it. It was time he came to his fool hoboing and come to his senses. Drawing that 15 told me there was something in the wind. The manager communicated with the Ansleys. His wife was an Ansley, and found out that Bernie Redfern had bought a pearl necklace there. His address was given as Box 444, Port Lawrence, Missawa, Ontario. First I thought I'd write, then I thought I'd wait until open season for cars and come down myself. Ain't no hand at writing. I've motored from Montreal, got to Port Lawrence yesterday, inquired at the post office. Told me they knew nothing of any Bernard Snythe the Redfern, but there was a Barney Snythe that had a P.O. box there. Lived on an island out here, they said. So here I am. And where's Bernie?" Valancy fingered her necklace. She was wearing $15,000 around her neck. and she had worried lest Barney had paid $15 for it and couldn't afford it. Suddenly she laughed in Dr. Redfern's face. "Excuse me, it's so amusing," said poor Valancy. "Isn't it?" said Dr. Redfern, seeing a joke, but not exactly hers. "Now you seem like a sensible young woman, and I dare say you have lots of influence over Barney. Can't you get him to come back to civilization and live like other people? I have a house up there, as big as a castle, furnished like a palace. I want company in it. Barney's wife, Barney's children." "Did Ethel Travers ever marry?" queried Valancy irrelevantly. "Bless you, yes. 2 years after Barney lamented. But she's a widow now. Pretty as ever, to be frank. That was my special reason to find Barney. Thought they'd make up for it, maybe. But of course, that's all off now. Doesn't matter. Barney's choice of wife is good enough for me. It's my boy I want. You think he'll be back?" "I don't know. But perhaps he'll come before night? Quite late, perhaps. And perhaps not till morning. But I could put you up comfortably. He'll certainly be back tomorrow." Dr. Redfern shook his head. "Too damp. I'll take no chances with rheumatism." "Why suffer that senseless anguish? Why not try Redfern's liniment?" quoted the imp at the back of Valancy's mind. "I must get back to Port Lawrence before the rain starts. Henry grows quite mad when he gets mud in the car. But I'll come back tomorrow. Meanwhile, you talk to Barney into reason." He shook her hand and patted her kindly on the shoulder. He looked at her if he would have kissed her, with a little encouragement, but Valancy did not give it. Not that she would have minded. He was rather dreadful and loud, and dreadful, but there was something about him she liked. Valancy thought doubly that it might have liked being his daughter-in-law if he not have been a millionaire, a score times over, and Barney was his son, and heir. She took him over the motor-boat and watched the lordly purple car roll through the woods with Henry at the wheels, looking not lawful to be uttered. Then she went back to Blue Castle. What she must do must be done quickly. Barney might return at any moment, and it was certainly going to rain. She was thankful she no longer felt very bad. When you are budgeoned on the head repeatedly, you naturally and mercifully become more and less insensible and stupid. She stood briefly like a faded flower bitten by frost, by the hearth, looking down at the white ashes of the last fire that had blazed in the Blue Castle. At any rate, she thought wearily, he'll be able to afford a divorce quite nicely. Chapter 39. She must write a note. The imp in the back of her mind laughed. In every story she'd ever read, when a runaway life decamped from home, she left a note, generally on a pincushion. It was not a very original idea, but one had to leave something intelligible. What was there but a note? She looked vaguely about her for something to write with. Ink? There was none. She'd never written anything since she'd come to the Blue Castle, save memorabilia of household necessities for Barney. A pencil sufficed for them, but now a pencil could not be found. Valancy absently crossed the door to Bluebeard's chamber and tried it. She vaguely expected to find it locked, but it opened unresistingly. She had never tried it before, and did not know whether Barney habitually kept it locked or not. If he did, he must have been badly upset to leave it unlocked. She did not realize she was doing something he told her not to do. She was only looking for something to write with. All of her faculties were concentrated on deciding just what she would say and how she would say it. There was not the slightest curiosity in her, and she went into the lean-to. There were no beautiful women hanging by their hairs in the wall. It seemed a very harmless apartment, with a commonplace little sheet iron stove in the middle of it, and a pipe sticking out through the roof. At one end was a table or counter crowded with odd-looking utensils, used no doubt by Barney in his smelly operations. Chemical experiments, probably, she reflected dully. At the other end was a big writing desk and a swivel chair. The side walls were lined with books. Valancy went blindly to the desk. There she stood motionless for a few minutes, looking down at something that lay on it, a bundle of galley proofs. On the top page bore the title Wild Honey. Under the title were the words by John Foster. The opening sentence, Pines were of a myth and legend. They strike their roots deep into the traditions of the older world, but wind and stars love their lofty tops. What music when old Eos draws his bow across the branches of the pine. She had heard Barney say that one day when they walked under them. So Barney was John Foster. Valancy was not excited. She absorbed all the shocks and sensations she could passage for one day. This reflected neither one way nor the other. She only thought, so this explains it. It was a small matter that had somehow stuck in her mind more persistently than its importance seemed to justify. Soon after Barney had brought her John Foster's latest book, she had been in Port Lawrence bookshop and heard a customer ask the proprietor for John Foster's new book. The proprietor had said curtly, "Not out yet. Won't be out till next week." Valancy opened her lips to say, "Oh, yes, it is out," but closed them again. After all, it was none of her business. She supposed the proprietor wanted to cover up his negligence in not getting the book promptly. Now she knew. The book Barney had given her had been one of the author's complimentary copies sent in advance. Well! Valancy pushed the proofs indifferently aside and sat down on the swivel chair. She took Barney's pen, and a vile one it was, and pulled out a sheet of paper to her and began to write. She could not think of anything to say except for bald facts. Dear Barney, I went to Dr. Trent this morning and found out he sent me the wrong letter by mistake. There was never this serious matter with my heart, and I am quite well now. I did not mean to trick you. Please believe that. I could not bear if you did not believe that. I'm very sorry for the mistake, but surely you can get a divorce if I leave you. Is desertion a ground for divorce in Canada? Of course, if there's anything I can do to help or hasten it, I will do it gladly, if your lawyer will let me know. I thank you for all your kindness to me. I shall never forget it. Think of me as kindly as you can, because I did not mean to trap you. Good-bye. Yours gratefully, Valancy. It was very cold and stiff, she knew, but to try to say anything else would be dangerous, like tearing away a dam. She didn't know what torrent of wild incoherencies and passionate anguish might pour out. In a postscript she added, Your father was here today. He's coming back tomorrow. He told me everything. I think you should go back to him. He's very lonely for you. He put the letter in the envelope and wrote Barney across it and left it on the desk. On it she laid the string of pearls. If they had been beads, she believed them, she would have kept them in memory of a wonderful year. But she could not keep 15,000 gift of a man who had married her after pity and whom she was now leaving. It hurt her to give up her pretty bauble. That was the odd thing, she reflected. The fact that she was leaving Barney did not hurt her. Yet. It lay in her heart like a cold, insensible thing. If it came to life, Valancy shuddered and went out. She put on her hat and mechanically fed Good Luck and Banjo. She locked the door and carefully hid the key in the old pine, and then she crossed to the mainland in the disappearing propeller. She stood for a moment on the bank, looking at her blue castle. The rain had not yet come, but the sky was dark, and Mr. was gray and sullen. The little house under its pines looked very pathetic. A casket rifled of its jewels, a lamp with its flame blown out. We shall never again hear the wind cry over Mr. Woods at night, thought Valancy. This hurt her too. She could have laughed to think of such a trifle could hurt her at such a time.